Mr. Chairman, I'll try to do my best, but this is pretty important legislation. First, I want to say I don't agree with many of the President's economic strategies. I don't believe in his notion of fear and isolationism. I don't believe in his notion of discussing things that are going to start trade wars. I don't believe in his lack of support for a functioning export-import bank that will help U.S. manufacturers build products and seek homes and find their acceptance in international markets. I don't support his notion that the FERC ought to mandate that consumers in Ohio or Pennsylvania or Kentucky pay higher electricity rates by forcing them to adhere to purchasing coal because he wants to bring coal back. And I don't support his notions of cutting innovation and R&D in various sectors of our economy. I sure don't think you have to apply the same kind of FERC logic on coal to oil and say that the only way that Amazon or Microsoft can get a tax break is if we destroy the great wilderness of the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. So, no, I too had high hopes for what would be a discussion about our corporate tax rate, having many companies in my state that have to compete on an international basis. I hoped that we were going to have that discussion, and when my colleagues on the other side of the aisle said it needed to be deficit neutral, I listened. I thought, okay, this is interesting. When they said we are going to close corporate loopholes to pay for a corporate rate reduction, I listened. And I thought, well, maybe this is where we're going to go. We're going to sit down in a collaborative fashion and work together. And Mr. Chairman, you and I do have a good working relationship, but the notion that the President had a meeting of the finance members to come down to the White House and I wasn't invited because I happen to represent a state that he didn't win is a ridiculous idea. So the notion that where we are today, and my main objection, is that instead of doing those things that we talked about on the corporate tax rate, looking at some of these things like carried interest or like-in-kind exchanges or the fact that golf courses get tax breaks, instead, a big chunk of this bill is being paid for on the backs of middle-class families by taking away their deductions. Their local sales tax deduction from a state like mine that doesn't have an income tax, from their property taxes not being able to be deducted, or the mortgage deduction, and I know there's differences between the House and the Senate bill, but this isn't simplification of our tax code. It's simply raising taxes on middle-class families in my state, and it's raising taxes on millions of Americans across the United States to give a break to the corporations. So it's a very different structure than we talked about. Now, most objecting, because Mr. Chairman, you and I have worked very hard on trying to make more affordable housing. But by getting rid of these deductions on property taxes, on home mortgage, the notion that you're getting rid of private activity bonds in the House legislation, and that you're making changes to the low-income tax credit in this Senate bill is just making housing more expensive at a time when we have a record number of Americans who are in unaffordable housing situations. So I look at our challenges, and I know that you or some of our colleagues talked about the small business corporate, small businesses getting, it's so complex. It's so challenging. I don't know what small businesses are going to benefit from this. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope that we can slow down. The reason I mentioned the housing, and I will wrap up, is that housing used to be 15% of GDP. In the few hearings that we did have on this, now it's only 12% of GDP. This bill, I know you think that this notion of returning investment from overseas, not a bad idea, something we could talk about, but we are just returning it, and it's going to go into the dividend pool. There's nothing in there that says it should go to infrastructure investment. There's nothing in there that says it should go for roads or housing or even job training. And I can guarantee you, it's not worth giving a tax break to corporations if you can't find a qualified workforce or they have to live an hour and a half away because housing is so expensive. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the additional minute. I think 5 is a very good target, and I appreciate it. I hope we'll slow down. I hope we'll have the courage to work together in a regular order process.